millions of years before a single heartbeat echoed across the Earth. Our world was nothing more than a swirling cloud of dust and fire, drifting through the endless dark of space. Imagine, the land beneath your feet once burned hotter than the surface of the sun, and the air you breathe did not even exist. Before oceans, before forests, before the first whisper of life, the Earth itself was being born from chaos, a planet forged in flame, sculpted by time, and cooled by the tears of falling rain that would one day become seas. Tonight, we travel back to that forgotten age, to witness how silence turned into storms, how fire gave birth to water, and how the cradle of life began to form. This is not just the story of the Earth, it is the story of everything that ever was, and everything that would ever be. And if tales of ancient mysteries and forgotten beginnings awaken your curiosity, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more journeys through sleeping history, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Long before a whisper of life stirred across the cosmos, before even the faintest glimmer of what we now call stars, there was only silence, an endless expanse of dark nothingness, stretching beyond the limits of imagination. In this infinite void, no time yet measured itself, no space yet claimed its place, and no matter dared to gather except in scattered wisps of invisible dust, drifting like forgotten memories of a dream. The universe itself lay asleep, its heartbeat imperceptible, and yet within this emptiness, the seeds of creation waited patiently, silent architects preparing for a masterpiece unseen. In that stillness, small fluctuations, minute and almost imperceptible, began to stir. Gravity, a force unknown to anything that existed, pulled tiny grains of matter toward one another, as if coaxing them into a dance that would last eons. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, these specks of dust gathered into clouds, vast nebulous gatherings of gas and particles, forming swirls that shimmered faintly in the darkness. They twisted and spiraled, colliding, breaking apart, rejoining, creating heat and light in their friction. Sparks of energy that hinted at what would one day become stars. Amid this cosmic ballet, pockets of heavier elements began to form, small clumps that, though tiny, held immense potential. They attracted more matter, growing, gathering mass with each passing million years. The universe, in its patient quiet, continued to weave, and gradually, stars ignited. A single spark flared into life, a ball of fire that would burn for billions of years, casting its glow across the surrounding void. These first stars were fierce, raw, untamed, their light cutting through darkness, illuminating the swirling dust clouds and setting the stage for planets yet unborn. And among these newborn stars, one particular cloud of dust and gas began to spin faster, its center collapsing under its own gravity. Around it, rings of molten matter circled, heated to brilliance, glowing like coals scattered on an infinite black hearth. This spinning mass, destined to become our sun, pulled surrounding material into orbit, shaping the foundations of a solar system that had yet to exist in any form familiar to us. It was chaos and order intertwined, a silent storm of creation that no eyes could witness, no mind could comprehend. Within these swirling rings, fragments collided, some melting, some shattering, some sticking together in fleeting unions that would eventually form larger bodies. Each collision released heat, energy, transformation. The process repeated endlessly, shaping the raw material into growing spheres of rock and metal, early embryos of planets, untamed and unshaped, yet carrying within them the promise of life yet to come. Among them, one particular body, neither the largest nor the smallest, neither brightest nor darkest, began its long journey toward becoming something extraordinary. This was the nascent Earth, a molten world of fire and rock, spinning endlessly in the void, blind to what awaited it. Even as it formed, the young planet endured collisions with other celestial bodies, some glancing, some catastrophic, each leaving scars that would last for eons. Heat from these impacts turned its surface into rivers of molten stone. Volcanoes gushed relentlessly, spewing smoke and ash into a sky that did not yet exist. The surface churned, oceans of lava shifting with violent majesty, while the atmosphere, if it could be called that, was a thin haze of vapor and gases, dense with the volatile essence of a world in turmoil. Here, in this violent crucible, the foundations of everything that would follow were laid, yet the planet remained silent, unknowing, a world waiting to awaken. Amid this turmoil, the first whispers of chemistry began. Elements mingled in the heat, forging compounds that would become the building blocks of life billions of years later. Simple molecules formed, collided, and split apart in endless repetition, setting in motion patterns and structures that would one day become unimaginably complex. The silence of the void was now punctuated by the quiet hum of transformation, the subtle murmur of creation in motion, a sound too faint for any ear, too slow for any mind, but unmistakable to the universe itself. And so, the stage was set. The silent void, once empty and infinite, now held within it the raw materials, the energy, the potential for a planet that would one day cradle life. Stars burned, planets spun, collisions raged, and still the cosmos waited, patient and eternal, for the next act in its grand story to unfold. Earth, newly born from fire and rock, lay at the heart of this unfolding drama, unformed, untamed, yet carrying within it the seeds of oceans, of air, of life, of everything that would one day exist. No eyes watched, no hands guided, no voice narrated, only the universe itself, vast, silent, eternal, shaping, molding, waiting. And from this quiet chaos, the first chapter of our world began, not with a sound, not with a breath, but with the inexorable pull of gravity and the dance of matter in the infinite dark. As the newborn sun blazed with its first fierce light, the surrounding ring of dust and molten rock began to writhe and twist in response. Tiny particles collided endlessly, sparks flying into the void, with each encounter glowing briefly before fading into darkness. These collisions were the whispers of creation, silent yet immense, shaping what would become the building blocks of planets, moons, and everything in between. The cloud that would one day become Earth was now a tempest of heat and motion, a spinning orb of chaos encased in fire, invisible to any eyes, unperceived by any mind, yet alive with potential energy that would echo through eternity. Within this roiling mass, layers of molten rock formed and reformed endlessly, rivers of liquid stone weaving patterns across a surface too violent to imagine. Volcanoes erupted with relentless fury, spewing fire, ash, and molten metal into the forming atmosphere. The ground itself was alive, shifting, collapsing, reshaping itself with every impact of wandering celestial bodies that hurtled through space with unstoppable momentum. Craters deep enough to swallow mountains formed and vanished, leaving scars that would last for eons, silent witnesses to a time before life, before sky, before breath. Amid this chaos, fragments of matter began to coalesce into larger bodies. Some collided at angles that sent shards spinning off into the darkness, never to return. Others met with perfect symmetry, sticking together in fleeting unions that gradually grew stronger with time. Each union released heat, each impact intensified the fire, and through this relentless dance, the embryo of the Earth grew, a molten jewel suspended in the black velvet of space. Gravity, patient and invisible, orchestrated this symphony, pulling material inward, shaping, forming, and consolidating, while the young planet swirled in a furious pirouette around the newborn sun. And then came the great collision, an event of unimaginable force. A celestial body, roughly the size of Mars, hurtled toward the Earth, its path unstoppable, its energy catastrophic. When the two met, the impact was catastrophic, a cataclysmic release of heat, light, and motion that reshaped the very surface of the young planet. Molten rock erupted into the void, creating rings of debris that would later coalesce into the moon. The Earth itself trembled, its molten heart roiling, in response to the impact reshaping continents that did not yet exist, setting the stage for a world that would one day cradle oceans and forests, mountains and valleys, life and breath. From this chaos arose a strange calm. The debris from the impact, a mix of rock and molten fragments, began to orbit the Earth, gradually gathering under its gravity. Over countless millennia, these fragments collided, merged, and formed a single, glowing body: the Moon, a silent companion destined to influence tides, light, and the rhythm of life on the Earth for billions of years to come. Meanwhile, the young planet, still molten, began to cool, its crust forming slowly, layer by layer, like the first fragile pages of a book that would one day tell the story of life itself. The atmosphere, if it could be called that, was a roiling, toxic mix of gases, suffocating and uninhabitable. Sulfur, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen swirled in violent currents above the molten surface, lightning arcing endlessly in a sky that had yet to be born. Volcanoes erupted continuously, spewing ash and fire into this primitive air, creating a haze that dimmed the young sun's light and cast the surface into a twilight that would last for millions of years. Amid the roar, the planet's heartbeat could almost be felt. A pulsing, molten rhythm, marking the slow emergence of a world unlike any that had existed before. Deep within the molten crust, heavier elements sank, forming a core that would one day generate a magnetic field, shielding the planet from cosmic radiation. Lighter elements rose, forming a fragile crust over the turbulent seas of molten rock below. Rivers of fire carved channels across the surface, some cooling into basaltic plains, others hardening into jagged mountains. Every shift, every tremor, every eruption was a note in a symphony of creation, silent to all, but the universe itself, a melody that would one day resonate in the hearts of life yet to be born. And yet, amid all this fire and turmoil, patterns began to emerge. The relentless motion of molten rock, the collisions of particles, the slow settling of layers, all created a balance, fragile and fleeting, between chaos and order. It was within this balance that the first whispers of stability formed, the first hints that this planet, born of fire, might one day sustain oceans, skies, and life. Gravity continued its patient work, pulling, shaping, and guiding, while the young Earth slowly spun, a radiant ember in the darkness, glowing with energy, alive with the possibility of everything to come. In the darkness beyond, other planets formed, other orbits settled, but the Earth's story was unique. Each impact, each eruption, each spark of molten stone contributed to a narrative that would stretch across billions of years. It was a story of fire and rock, of chaos and order, a tale written in heat and collisions, waiting for the first gentle touch of water, the first quiet whisper of life, the first breath of a living world. The night of the silent void slowly gave way to dawn, not a dawn of light, but a dawn of potential. From molten beginnings, the Earth was slowly sculpted, a canvas for the universe to paint upon, a stage for creation to unfold. The sparks of fire, once destructive, were now the architects of formation, shaping the planet's surface, guiding the birth of mountains, valleys, and the first oceans yet to come. And in this relentless, silent forging, the promise of life began to stir, deep within the heart of a world born of fire. The young Earth continued its relentless spin around the blazing sun, a molten sphere of fire and rock suspended in the infinite darkness. Its surface glowed like liquid embers, rivers of molten stone carving paths through newly forming crust, volcanoes erupting with unbridled fury, spewing smoke and flame into the primitive atmosphere. The planet was alive with motion, a world of heat and chaos, each moment a battle between fire and gravity, between creation and destruction. The very surface seemed to breathe, heaving and churning as if in anticipation of life yet to come, unaware that its first oceans and skies awaited just beyond the horizon of time. In the darkness above, lightning arced endlessly across thick clouds of sulfur and ash, illuminating the chaotic landscape below with brief, brilliant flashes. The air, heavy with carbon dioxide and toxic gases, shimmered in waves of heat. carrying the scent of molten rock and the raw energy of a world in formation. Thunder rolled across the young planet with every eruption, echoing in valleys that did not yet exist, a symphony of power and intensity that no eye could witness and no ear could fully comprehend. Even in this turmoil, the forces of order were at work, drawing molten layers into more stable formations, sinking heavy metals toward the core, and forming a crust that would one day support oceans, forests, and mountains. Over countless millennia, the surface of the Earth slowly began to cool, though the process was neither uniform nor gentle. Lava flows hardened into jagged plains, blackened and scarred, rivers of fire freezing in motion as their heat radiated into space. Mountains formed where molten rock pushed upward, reaching for heights that would eventually pierce the skies of a world not yet born. Valleys and basins were carved by torrents of magma, shaping the landscape in ways both violent and beautiful. It was a world of extremes, of heat and cold, of creation born from destruction, and in every inch of molten rock, the future of the planet was silently written. And then came the rains. Not gentle showers, but torrents of water vapor, formed from gases that had slowly condensed in the cooling atmosphere. For the first time, the young Earth felt the touch of water, hot and acidic, boiling upon contact with molten rock, hissing and steaming as it met the fiery surface. Yet, as time passed, the rains grew cooler, settling into basins and craters, forming shallow pools that would one day become oceans. Rivers of water began to trace patterns across hardened lava plains, carving channels and shaping the land with patient persistence. The symphony of creation continued, now joined by the music of falling rain, a rhythm that would echo across the planet for eons. The first oceans were not the tranquil blue seas we know today, but boiling, turbulent pools of water and steam, infused with minerals leached from molten rock. Yet even in this cauldron of heat and chemical activity, the conditions for life were quietly emerging. Simple molecules formed in these watery crucibles, interacting with heat and energy in ways that would one day give rise to the building blocks of life. Lightning struck the surface and the seas alike, driving chemical reactions that created complex compounds, setting the stage for a story billions of years in the making. The young planet, fierce and untamed, had begun to cradle the very elements that would one day sustain living beings. Above, the sky remained thick with clouds of gas and ash, a swirling, stormy expanse lit intermittently by lightning and the distant glow of molten land. Winds howled across barren plains, carrying heat and moisture in a chaotic dance. Volcanoes continued to erupt, their eruptions feeding the atmosphere with sulfur and carbon, shaping the environment in ways subtle and profound. The Earth was not yet hospitable, but it was alive, its heartbeat visible in rivers of lava, in the steam rising from shallow pools, in the persistent motion of oceans forming against cooled rock. With each passing eon, the crust thickened, providing a more stable foundation for the waters that spread across the planet. The balance between fire and water, between eruption and rain, began to stabilize, creating conditions where the first whispers of life could emerge. Deep beneath the surface, the molten core continued to churn, generating a magnetic field that would one day protect the planet from cosmic storms. The young Earth, once a searing ball of molten rock, was slowly transforming into a world capable of sustaining life, a world ready to whisper secrets of its fiery birth to the beings that would one day walk its lands. In this endless interplay of heat and water, of lava and rain, the Earth began to take on the features that would define it for billions of years. Ocean basins deepened, volcanic mountains rose, and valleys formed where molten rock had cooled unevenly. Clouds thickened above, shielding the planet from the young sun's harsh rays, while storms continued to rage, shaping the atmosphere and surface alike. Each eruption, each rainfall, each crack in the cooling crust was a note in the symphony of creation, silent to all but the universe itself, a music of fire and water, of chaos slowly yielding to order. And so, the fiery planet, once a molten inferno spinning wildly through space, began to settle into a rhythm, a delicate balance between heat and cool, between eruption and precipitation. Rivers of water traced the surface, forming channels, basins, and seas, while lava continued to shape mountains and valleys, unseen sculptor of a world yet to witness life. The storms, though violent, were now the companions of formation, driving the cycles of erosion and deposition that would one day create landscapes familiar to eyes that did not yet exist. Amid all this, the young Earth remained silent, unaware of its destiny. It bore the scars of collisions, the marks of fire and ash, yet it was alive with motion, energy, and the first whispers of stability. This chapter of the planet's story, written in molten rock and storm, rain and heat, was a testament to the relentless creativity of the cosmos. From fire and chaos, a world capable of nurturing oceans, skies, and life was slowly emerging, patient, silent, eternal, awaiting the next chapter in its unfolding tale. After eons of fire and molten upheaval, the young Earth began to experience a new kind of movement, a rhythm far gentler yet no less powerful than the eruptions that had shaped its surface. Clouds thickened above the red and blackened crust, born from gases slowly cooling and condensing into drops of water. These clouds, heavy with the weight of their own promise, drifted across the horizon, casting shadows on the glowing land below. Lightning arced endlessly, striking the molten plains and oceans alike, releasing sparks of energy that danced briefly before disappearing into the darkness. It was the first music of the storms, a symphony of power and awe, an orchestra composed not by hands but by nature itself. The rains came first as torrents, falling in sheets from the thick, swirling clouds. When they hit the molten surfaces, they hissed and steamed, sending curtains of vapor into the young sky. Rivers formed from these first waters, tracing erratic paths across cooled lava plains, finding channels carved eons before by molten rivers, now long solidified. Basins filled, forming shallow pools that would deepen over time, collecting minerals and heat, and creating the first nurturing grounds for the seeds of life yet to emerge. The sound of the rain, fierce and unrelenting, echoed across valleys and mountains, a rhythmic percussion marking the passage of time in a world that had never known hours, days, or years. Thunder rolled across the planet, resonating through every crack, crevice, and hollow. Each strike of lightning was a spark of possibility, igniting chemical reactions in the water and atmosphere. The first simple molecules formed in these electrified pools, building blocks that would one day combine into more complex structures, the precursors to life itself. Volcanoes continued their eruptions, feeding the atmosphere with clouds of ash and gas. Yet the rain washed some of it into the growing oceans, carrying minerals into pools that shimmered under the dim glow of the young sun. The interplay of fire, water, and electricity created a chemical symphony, unseen and unheard by any observer, yet profound in its impact. Winds howled across the barren landscapes, driven by temperature differences between cooling lava plains and heated air above. These winds shaped the clouds, spreading moisture across the surface, driving storms over mountains yet to exist in recognizable form, sculpting valleys in the softer deposits. The first hurricane-force gusts tore across molten plains, flattening small ridges, scattering debris into the oceans, and slowly contributing to the gradual leveling of the planet's surface. These were the early forces of erosion, invisible architects molding the future contours of Earth, their effects subtle yet enduring, shaping a world that would one day cradle life in abundance. Above, the atmosphere thickened, layers forming in response to the persistent rain, winds, and volcanic outgassing. Carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, and traces of methane created a turbulent sky, often opaque and suffocating, yet slowly developing the protective envelope that would eventually allow life to breathe. Lightning continued its endless arcs, carving paths of energy through the clouds and oceans, each strike catalyzing reactions, each storm accelerating chemical processes critical to the emergence of life. The young planet, once solely a realm of molten rock, was becoming a dynamic system of interacting elements. a living laboratory where chemistry and physics converged in perfect chaotic balance. Deep within the forming oceans, minerals and salts accumulated, stirred by the relentless waves and currents driven by wind and temperature differences. Pools rich with iron, calcium, and phosphorus developed unique chemical properties, heated by geothermal vents beneath the surface. Here, the first hints of prebiotic chemistry occurred, tiny molecules colliding, breaking apart, and recombining in endless repetition. The storms above, though destructive in appearance, contributed directly to these processes, delivering energy, mixing compounds, and creating pockets of stability amid chaos. Each flash of lightning, each drop of rain, each gust of wind was a participant in a dance billions of years in the making, a silent chorus preparing the stage for life. As the planet rotated, the pattern of storms shifted, following heat gradients between sunlit regions and cooler surfaces. Cyclones formed in the oceans, stirring the waters, mixing chemical components, and distributing heat. Precipitation fell onto the nascent landmasses, carving channels and depositing sediments that would become the first rocks, soil, and eventually the foundation for ecosystems yet to come. The first seasons, if they could be called that, were defined not by gentle cycles, but by extremes, violent downpours, scorching heat, and chilling nights under a sky shrouded in storm clouds. Yet even in this turbulence, a rhythm began to emerge, a slow, repeating cadence that would define the water cycle for eons. The first oceans, still hot and tumultuous, began to stabilize in pockets, developing density layers caused by differences in temperature and salinity. Currents formed, moving water around basins and slowly moderating the extremes of heat and cold. Along coastlines yet to be formed, the interaction of molten rock and cooling water produced chemical gradients and energy flows that would become vital to early prebiotic reactions. The Earth was no longer merely a molten sphere with rain. It was a dynamic system, a self-regulating entity, a world learning how to balance fire and water, storm and calm, destruction and creation. Above the storm-laden skies, gaps sometimes opened, allowing the young sun to shine upon the surface. Light reflected off steaming oceans and rain-soaked plains, glinting through clouds, creating moments of brilliance amid the darkness. These fleeting moments, rare and transient, were the first glimpses of what the planet might become. A world of water, sky and light, capable of sustaining life, capable of whispering secrets to those patient enough to witness its slow unfolding. And so, the first storms raged, relentless yet necessary, shaping the land, sculpting the oceans, and energizing the chemistry that would one day lead to life. The Earth, still young, continued its journey from chaos to balance, each raindrop a note in the silent symphony of creation, each flash of lightning a spark of potential, each gale a brushstroke on the canvas of the blue planet yet to awaken. From these storms, the Earth was learning to breathe, to cycle, to hold water, and in doing so, to prepare for the emergence of life that would one day call it home. Above the boiling oceans and jagged mountains of molten stone, the first true breaths of the atmosphere began to form, a delicate, invisible veil surrounding the young Earth. Unlike the air we know today, this atmosphere was thick, heavy, and violent, composed of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, methane, ammonia, and traces of sulfur. It swirled with heat, electricity, and the faint glimmer of condensation, a cauldron of gases both hostile and miraculous, setting the stage for a planet that would one day cradle life. Winds swept across the molten plains and storm-laden seas, sculpting the clouds into turbulent formations, each one alive with motion, energy, and potential. Lightning, born of friction between charged gases in the thick clouds, crackled endlessly, arcing across the sky in brilliant, fleeting flashes. These bolts struck the molten crust, the steaming oceans, and the suspended clouds alike, releasing bursts of energy that would forever alter the chemistry of the young planet. Each strike catalyzed reactions in the water and gases, forming complex molecules that would later become the building blocks of life. the sound of thunder rolled across the planet, echoing through valleys and plains yet unformed, reverberating in the oceans and resonating with the pulse of the earth itself. It was a music beyond comprehension, the first heartbeat of a world learning to breathe. The dense atmosphere trapped heat from the young sun, preventing the planet from cooling too quickly, while simultaneously driving violent winds and storms that distributed heat and gases unevenly across the surface. Convection currents moved gases in endless, swirling patterns, creating layers of differing density and composition. In some areas, thick clouds formed permanent shrouds that blotted out the faint light of the sun. In others, rifts in the clouds allowed piercing beams of light to touch the surface, heating pools of water, igniting chemical reactions, and creating localized cycles of evaporation and condensation. The planet, once only a spinning orb of fire, now had a living skin of air, constantly shifting, constantly moving, shaping its own destiny with invisible hands. Volcanic eruptions continued unabated, adding gases, ash, and particulate matter to the young sky. The air became a swirling soup of chemicals, each element playing a role in shaping the early environment. Sulfurous plumes and carbon dioxide clouds mingled with nitrogen, forming complex mixtures that filled the lower atmosphere with weighty turbulence. As volcanic ash drifted and settled, it provided surfaces for chemical reactions, aiding in the formation of new compounds in pools of water below. The storms, rain, and volcanic outgassing combined to create a system of perpetual motion, chaotic yet patterned, harsh yet necessary. Over millions of years, the upper atmosphere began to develop a rudimentary structure, layers forming as gases separated according to weight and composition. Methane and ammonia hovered closer to the surface, while lighter gases like hydrogen and helium drifted into the void. Temperature gradients created convection currents that moved clouds and gases across the planet, shaping weather patterns long before oceans or land masses could stabilize. Lightning continued to play its eternal role, driving reactions, creating energy flows, and influencing the distribution of chemicals in the nascent seas below. In this turbulent air, dust and small particulates floated freely, remnants of collisions and volcanic eruptions, providing the first solid nuclei around which water vapor could condense. The first rain, born of these clouds, began to fall with irregular intensity, striking hot rocks, steaming into the sky, and joining pools of water that already shimmered with dissolved minerals. The feedback between atmosphere, surface, and oceans created a dynamic system, a self-regulating network that would persist for billions of years, forming the basis for weather, climate, and eventually life itself. Even in this violent environment, patterns began to emerge. Storms followed paths dictated by rotation, gravity, and heating differences. Convection cells organized the air into semi-regular currents. Lightning became both destructive and creative, breaking down molecules and enabling the formation of new compounds, igniting chemical chains that would lead to amino acids and other building blocks of life. The young Earth, once only a sphere of fire and molten rock, had now developed a breathing layer, an ever-changing skin of gases and storms, whispering secrets to the oceans below and the molten heart within. Through the haze of ash and clouds, the sun's light occasionally penetrated, warming patches of surface water, driving evaporation, and fueling the endless cycle of storms. Each cloudburst, each gale, each streak of lightning contributed to the choreography of this atmospheric symphony. The Earth, still untamed, was learning balance, a delicate dance of pressure, heat, motion, and chemistry. It was a world that inhaled and exhaled, that churned and flowed, that stormed and rained, preparing the stage for the first traces of life to emerge in hidden pools far below the surface. And yet, amid all this turbulence, there was a rhythm, subtle and patient, woven into the fabric of the atmosphere itself. Winds, storms, and lightning were not random, but part of a cosmic plan, a system learning to harmonize chaos with order. The Earth's breath, heavy, turbulent, and chemical, was the first whisper of vitality in a world that had previously known only fire and rock. It was a breath that would shape oceans, erode mountains, fill valleys, and sustain life yet to come. From these storms, from these clouds, from the endless flashes of lightning and the roll of thunder, the young earth matured slowly, its surface carved by wind and rain, its chemistry enriched by atmospheric energy, its waters and air working together to prepare a sanctuary for life. And in this chapter of creation, the planet learned to inhale and exhale, to cycle, to sustain, to whisper in its own silent, eternal voice, readying itself for the next epoch in its unfolding story. As storms raged above and oceans churned below, the young earth began to whisper a new kind of story, one invisible to the eye, silent to the ear, yet profound in its significance. Within the vast, mineral-rich pools, heated by volcanic vents and bathed in intermittent sunlight piercing through thick clouds, simple molecules collided endlessly, breaking apart, combining and rearranging in an intricate dance that would one day give birth to life. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus swirled together in these primordial waters, their bonds forming and dissolving with the rhythm of the planet itself. Each spark of lightning, each tremor from beneath, each wave that lapped the cooled lava carried energy sufficient to drive reactions that would echo through billions of years. These early molecules, fragile and fleeting, began to link, forming chains and rings of unprecedented complexity. Amino acids appeared, the essential building blocks of proteins, shimmering briefly in the heated pools before dispersing, only to reunite in new combinations. Nucleotides, the precursors of RNA and DNA, emerged in scattered pockets, fragile carriers of information yet unformed into life as we know it. The oceans, turbulent and boiling, were at once hostile and nurturing, a paradoxical cradle where creation played out in silence, each molecule a tiny participant in the grand, invisible symphony of life. The chemical landscape of the young Earth was a palette of infinite possibility. Minerals leached from volcanic rock enriched the waters with iron, magnesium, and calcium. Salts and acids fluctuated with temperature and pH, creating gradients that concentrated molecules into microenvironments ideal for complex reactions. Hydrothermal vents spewed superheated fluids, injecting both energy and chemical diversity into the surrounding waters. Pools near these vents glimmered with compounds not found elsewhere, tiny chemical laboratories in which nature experimented endlessly, forging structures that would one day replicate, evolve, and proliferate. Lightning, ever present, acted as a catalyst, splitting bonds, generating free radicals, and initiating chains of reactions that would otherwise be impossible. Each bolt struck with immense energy, a fleeting yet transformative event that reshaped molecules and generated new possibilities. The clouds above, thick and turbulent, carried chemicals from eruption to ocean, delivering sulfur, ammonia, and carbon compounds in uneven, chaotic patterns. These inputs created chemical gradients that concentrated reactive molecules, forming droplets and vesicles that began to act as primitive containers, precursors to the first cell membranes. In shallow tidal pools along cooled lava plains, evaporation created concentrated solutions of organic molecules. Here, amino acids began to link more persistently, forming short chains known as peptides. Lipids, naturally aggregating, formed microscopic spheres that could trap these peptides and nucleotides, creating protocells, the earliest scaffolds for life. The environment was harsh and unforgiving, yet paradoxically, it fostered stability in these fleeting structures, offering repeated opportunities for the chemistry of life to take root. These vesicles drifted and jostled in the shallow waters, sometimes breaking apart, sometimes fusing with others, in a relentless trial and error process guided only by physics and chemistry. Across vast oceans, currents transported molecules and protocells from one chemically rich environment to another, mixing pools of compounds in a slow-motion dance of possibility. Temperature gradients, pH differences, mineral surfaces, and repeated wet-dry cycles created a multitude of microenvironments, each testing, selecting, and reinforcing the most stable configurations. Slowly, patterns emerged, molecules that could persist, assemble, and catalyzed reactions were favored, their structures refined over countless eons. The planet itself became a laboratory, vast and patient, orchestrating reactions invisible to the eye, but essential to the emergence of life. Within this chemical theater, self-replicating molecules may have arisen, fleeting strands of RNA-like structures capable of guiding the formation of similar molecules from available components. These early replicators were fragile, vulnerable to degradation, yet in their ephemeral existence lay the first spark of inheritance, the precursor to evolution. Errors in replication, collisions with other molecules, and environmental stresses created variations, a primordial trial and error that would, over unimaginable spans of time, select for greater stability and complexity. The stage was set for the transition from chemistry to biology, for the faint heartbeat of life to begin echoing silently through Earth's oceans. The young Earth, previously defined by fire, water, and storms, now bore the whispers of life within its chemical womb. Molecules moved with purpose dictated by the laws of physics and chemistry, interacting in ways both predictable and random. Heat from volcanic vents, the energy of lightning, and the gentle agitation of waves all contributed to the complex reactions unfolding within countless tiny pockets. Each reaction, each collision, each fleeting assembly was a step towards something more profound, the emergence of structures capable of growth, replication, and eventually adaptation. It was a world of contrasts. Boiling oceans churned alongside frozen pools in shadowed basins. Lightning split the air even as the rain washed molecules into deeper pools. Minerals offered surfaces for reactions even as currents dispersed them into chaos. And in this dynamic tension, the first stirrings of life quietly took shape, invisible and intangible, yet real, a nascent force poised to transform the planet forever. The chemistry of life had begun, humble, fragile, yet unstoppable in its potential, guided only by the patient and eternal forces of the Earth itself. As time passed, the protocells multiplied, collided, and evolved within their chemical crucibles. Gradually, complexity increased. Molecules formed networks, pathways, and reactions capable of sustaining themselves, storing energy, and even transmitting information. The first whispers of metabolism, replication, and heredity took root, subtle yet undeniable, setting the stage for the vast tapestry of life that would one day flourish across continents and oceans. The Earth, once a sphere of molten rock, storms, and rain, now held within its waters the seeds of all living beings, waiting for the right conditions, the right moment, to awaken fully. And so, amid the turbulence of oceans, the flicker of lightning, and the heat of volcanic vents, the chemistry of life quietly unfolded. Molecules collided, linked, and transformed. Protocells formed, and the first echoes of self-replication arose. The Earth had become more than fire and water. It had become a living laboratory, patient and eternal, preparing for the moment when chemistry would give way to biology, and life would finally breathe its first silent breath across the young blue planet. In the quiet depths of the young oceans, amid pools enriched by minerals and stirred by gentle currents, life took its first tentative steps. Invisible to any eye, imperceptible to any sense, tiny spheres of protocells drifted silently, self-contained and fragile. Each one was a whisper, a delicate echo of the complex chemistry that had preceded it, a vessel in which molecules could interact, persist, and evolve. They moved not with intention, but with the currents, the temperature gradients, and the unseen rhythm of the Earth itself, their presence a secret kept by time and patience. These protocells, simple yet remarkable, contain chains of RNA-like molecules, capable of guiding the assembly of other molecules, capable of reproducing in ways so subtle that the oceans themselves barely noticed. Collisions with other protocells sometimes led to fusion, creating slightly more complex structures. Other times, protocells broke apart, their contents dispersed, only to recombine elsewhere. This constant cycle of assembly, collision, and transformation formed the earliest patterns of persistence, a trial and error process dictated by chemistry, physics, and the ceaseless motion of the young planet. Among these tiny spheres, variations emerged. Some were more stable, resisting the heat of volcanic vents, the turbulence of waves, and the energy of lightning strikes. Others were more fragile, fleeting, disassembling before any meaningful reaction could take place. Yet even in their fragility lay the seeds of endurance. Through repetition over countless eons, structures that persisted accumulated subtle advantages. A slightly more stable membrane, a molecule better able to catalyze reactions, a configuration that allowed replication with fewer errors. These were the first whispers of evolution, subtle, invisible, and relentless. Deep in hydrothermal vents, life found niches shielded from the worst of the surface chaos. Here, mineral-rich fluids provided both protection and nutrients, warmth and energy. Protobacteria-like organisms thrived, drawing on chemicals dissolved in the vent waters to fuel primitive metabolisms. Chemosynthesis replaced sunlight as a source of energy, enabling life to flourish in darkness. These tiny whisperers multiplied, spread, and experimented with new chemical strategies, each replication an opportunity to explore the vast space of possibility offered by the young Earth's chemistry. On the surface, sunlight penetrated shallow pools, providing energy that drove photochemical reactions. Some protocells drifted toward these illuminated zones, where energy from photons powered new chemical pathways. Molecules reorganized, catalyzed by light and warmth, creating increasingly complex chains. Here, in the interplay of water, minerals, and light, protocells learned the first lessons of survival: to harness energy, to maintain structure, to reproduce. The first faint patterns of life were being etched into the vast canvas of the oceans, invisible yet profoundly significant. Storms, lightning, and currents continued to shape the environment, presenting challenges to these tiny beings. Some protocells were destroyed instantly, ripped apart by energy too great, dispersed by waves too strong. Yet each disaster offered opportunity. Molecules recombined, membranes reformed, and occasionally a structure more resilient emerged. These cycles of creation and destruction, of persistence and loss, were the quiet tutors of early life. Over time, the survivors dominated, their strategies etched into the molecules they carried, a silent testament to the power of persistence and adaptation. As protocells multiplied and interacted, early ecosystems began to take shape. Though primitive, the oceans became a patchwork of chemical microenvironments, each supporting different assemblages of protocells. Some were concentrated near volcanic vents, thriving on minerals and heat. Others floated near the surface, harnessing sunlight to drive reactions. Currents carried molecules and cells from one zone to another, facilitating exchanges and encouraging diversity. In this unseen world, cooperation and competition coexisted in an intricate balance, setting the stage for the evolution of complexity that would one day dominate the planet. Over millions of years, certain protocells developed rudimentary membranes that were more robust, allowing them to endure temperature changes and chemical variations. Chains of nucleotides stabilized, improving replication fidelity, while proteins and other molecules enhanced the internal chemistry. These structures, tiny yet extraordinary, represented the first true steps from chemistry toward biology. They were fragile whispers in the vast ocean, yet their persistence would ripple through time, creating the foundation upon which all future life would build. The young Earth, once only fire, water, and storms, had now embraced a new dimension. Life, tiny, silent, resilient, these first organisms, tiny whisperers, moved through oceans, interacting, competing, and evolving. Each moment was a dance of molecules, each collision a test, each replication a triumph. The planet itself seemed to recognize these emergent forms, its storms, currents, and chemistry guiding and shaping their path, offering both peril and protection. And so, in the silent depths of the young oceans, life quietly began to whisper its presence. It was invisible, intangible, yet undeniable, a force emerging from chemistry, nurtured by water, storms, and heat. These tiny whisperers, fragile yet resilient, began the journey that would one day lead to ecosystems, forests, skies, and animals. The Earth, a fiery, storm-laden sphere only recently formed, now carried within it the first hints of the vibrant, complex tapestry of life that would come to define its future. As the storms subsided and the rains continued to fall, the young oceans began to rise, filling basins carved over millennia by molten flows, volcanic collapses, and asteroid impacts. Pools of mineral-rich water coalesced into vast sheets, reflecting the pale light of the distant sun and creating the first vast oceans. These waters, initially boiling and turbulent, gradually cooled as heat radiated into space and rain carried away energy. Currents formed, sweeping across newly formed ocean basins, stirring chemical compounds and distributing heat, laying the groundwork for the regulation of climate and the eventual stabilization of ecosystems. Amid these rising seas, the first landmasses began to emerge. Volcanic islands rose from the depths as molten rock pushed upward, piercing through water and creating rocky outcrops. Repeated eruptions built chains of islands, some connecting to form primitive continents. These landmasses, jagged and barren, bore the scars of fire and ash, yet even in their raw state, they provided shelter and chemical diversity for the emerging life in surrounding waters. Basalt and granite formed the skeletons of continents, while erosion from wind and rain began the slow sculpting of valleys, cliffs, and riverbeds. The young oceans, driven by winds and the rotation of the earth, carved channels and bays into the nascent continents. Tidal forces, influenced by a moon not yet fully stabilized, caused currents that eroded coastlines, redistributed sediments, and deepened basins. These tides transported nutrients and minerals across vast distances, enabling chemical exchanges between land and sea. Minerals carried by rivers, deposited into coastal pools, and distributed by waves, created rich zones of chemical diversity, critical to the continued evolution of early life. In the shallow waters near shores, life found both shelter and energy, drifting in nutrient-rich eddies, carried by the pulse of the planet itself. Above, clouds formed dense sheets, driven by evaporation from the oceans. Storms became more organized, their paths influenced by the rotation of the Earth and the rising land masses. Lightning continued to flash across the skies, catalyzing reactions in both air and water. Volcanic eruptions contributed additional gases, creating temporary spikes in atmospheric composition that influenced weather and climate. Winds carried ash and chemicals across continents, fertilizing shallow seas and creating gradients that promoted diversity in both chemistry and early protocells. Each storm, each eruption, each rainfall was a subtle sculptor, shaping the emerging land and life with patient precision. As landmasses stabilized, erosion became a dominant force. Water falling from clouds, rivers tracing nascent valleys, and ocean waves pounding newly formed coastlines slowly ground volcanic rock into sediment. Layers of silt, sand, and clay accumulated in basins, creating fertile zones that would one day support microbial mats and stromatolites. These sediments captured minerals and nutrients, concentrating them in pockets ideal for chemical reactions. Tiny organisms, drifting from the oceans, colonized these shallow waters, finding both shelter and abundant energy sources. Here, life began to anchor, interacting with solid surfaces, forming communities, and creating feedback loops between land, sea, and atmosphere. Beneath the surface, tectonic forces began to assert themselves. Convection currents in the molten mantle caused shifts and collisions, creating the earliest faults, ridges, and basins. Some landmasses were pushed upward, forming mountain ranges, while others sank, forming deeper ocean basins. Volcanic activity continued, periodically reshaping coastlines and altering chemical compositions in surrounding waters. This ceaseless motion ensured a dynamic environment, constantly changing, constantly presenting new challenges and opportunities for emerging life. Life, though microscopic, was attuned to these changes, evolving in response to shifting nutrients, heat, and pressure. Along shallow continental shelves, Waves carried minerals and sediments inland, depositing layers of nutrients and creating gradients that life could exploit. Tides and storms mixed these zones, ensuring chemical diversity and providing energy for primitive metabolisms. Pools of water trapped behind emerging landforms acted as laboratories, where chemical reactions continued uninterrupted, molecules concentrated, and protocells persisted. Life, once drifting aimlessly in vast oceans, now had varied environments to explore, adapting to the chemical and physical contours of the rising continents. The interplay of land and sea created microclimates, pockets where temperature, salinity, and chemical composition differed subtly. These microclimates became havens for protocells, promoting diversification and specialization. Currents carried heat, nutrients, and organisms across short distances, connecting isolated pools into networks of interaction. The stage was set for evolutionary experimentation, with the rising continents acting as both barriers and bridges, shaping the pathways of life's earliest journeys. As the oceans expanded, some landmasses eroded, depositing sediments that formed shallow shelves and submerged plains. Others rose through tectonic uplift, creating islands and mountain ranges. These landforms influenced ocean currents, creating eddies, whirlpools, and zones of upwelling, concentrating nutrients and promoting biological activity. The planet, once a molten sphere with transient pools of water, had now developed a complex landscape of oceans, continents, and chemical diversity. Storms, currents, and geological activity worked in concert, shaping the physical and chemical environment to support the emergence of life. And so, as the young oceans rose and continents began to take shape, Earth matured into a dynamic, interconnected system. Water sculpted the land, wind shaped the coastlines, volcanic activity enriched the oceans, and storms orchestrated cycles of chemical renewal. Life, tiny and invisible, responded in kind, adapting, persisting, and preparing to flourish in a world now balanced between water and rock, storms and calm, chaos and order. The stage was set for a planet alive with potential, a canvas ready for the next chapters in its unfolding story, where oceans, continents, and life would continue their silent, eternal dance. As oceans rose and continents slowly stabilized, the first faint traces of life began to sense the land, the edges where water met rock, where tides lapped against primitive shores. Tiny protocells, drifting near the surface of shallow waters, were carried by currents and tides into the margins of these emerging lands. Pools trapped behind volcanic ridges or in shallow basins became isolated laboratories, incubators where life could experiment with new conditions. Here, the chemistry of life encountered sunlight directly, energy streaming through water to catalyze reactions, stimulating growth, replication, and subtle organization. The sun, a distant but growing force in the sky, shone through gaps in thick clouds, its rays warming the surface waters and shallow pools. Photochemical reactions, invisible yet profound, began to shape molecules into new arrangements. Lipids and proteins responded to this energy, folding and aggregating into more complex structures. Nucleotides paired more efficiently, guided by the subtle warmth of sunlight, and protocells thrived in the gentle illumination. The edges of the oceans, previously hostile and turbulent, became fertile margins where chemistry, energy, and environment converged in delicate balance. Evaporation at these shallow pools concentrated solutes, creating gradients of chemical potential that protocells could exploit. Temperature differences between sunlit and shaded areas generated convection currents within pools, mixing nutrients and driving reactions forward. Minerals deposited from tides and floods enriched these zones, providing surfaces for molecules to bind and organize. The interface between water and rock became a bridge between oceanic life and the possibility of terrestrial existence, a threshold across which life could extend its influence. As protocells multiplied and diversified, some adapted to temporary drying of pools, enduring brief exposure to air, sun, and fluctuating temperatures. These adaptations, simple yet remarkable, represented the first steps toward colonization of land. Molecules reorganized to resist desiccation, membranes thickened, and metabolic reactions adjusted to cope with higher energy input from sunlight. Life was beginning to explore the boundaries of its environment, testing the margins of ocean and rock, preparing for an eventual expansion beyond the water's edge. Tiny mats of microbial life began to form on submerged rocks and along tidal flats. These mats, dense communities of protocells and early bacteria, stabilized sediments and created microenvironments. They captured nutrients, shielded delicate structures from direct exposure, and facilitated chemical reactions in sheltered pockets. Layers of these mats began to interact with sunlight, minerals, and water, producing chemical byproducts that enriched the surrounding environment. These nascent ecosystems were invisible to the eye, yet they were shaping the land, preparing it for life that would one day emerge more visibly. Tides, waves, and storms continued to sculpt the emerging shorelines. Pools periodically flooded and drained, mixing organisms, redistributing nutrients, and creating cycles of challenge and opportunity. Lightning, occasionally striking near these pools, catalyzed additional chemical reactions, adding energy to the fragile systems. Heat from the sun and chemical energy from minerals combined to sustain reactions within these pools. Life was no longer confined to deep oceans or volcanic vents. It had extended its reach to the margins, exploring, adapting, and slowly mastering the interface between water and land. Over thousands of years, gradients of salinity, temperature, and chemical composition created diverse niches along the primitive shores. Protocells in these niches experimented with photosensitive reactions, using light to drive early metabolic processes. Some chains of molecules began to replicate more efficiently in sunlit pools, while others thrived in shaded or partially submerged zones. The interplay of exposure and protection, energy and stability, created a dynamic environment in which selection subtly guided the persistence of advantageous structures. These were the first lessons of life on land: resilience, adaptation, and the utilization of energy from the sun. Volcanic islands, tidal flats, and coastal plains became laboratories of emergence. Protocells that endured temporary dryness developed protective layers. Those exposed to light catalyzed complex reactions. Nutrients from decaying organic matter and mineral deposits provided sustenance, while currents ensured distribution and mixing. Each cycle of flooding and drying, each interaction with light and chemical gradients, reinforced the processes that would eventually allow more complex life to emerge on solid ground. The first whispers of terrestrial life were present, subtle, almost undetectable, yet persistent. Clouds above continued to churn, bringing intermittent storms, lightning, and rainfall. Each rain event replenished pools, redistributed chemicals, and reshaped sediments along emerging shores. Winds carried dust, ash, and minerals from volcanic eruptions inland, enriching the edges of pools with essential elements. These cycles created feedback loops, linking the atmosphere, oceans, and land in a network of energy and chemistry. Protocells responded to these cycles, their replication, metabolism, and survival attuned to the rhythm of Earth itself. And so, as sunlight kissed the first rocks and shallow pools at the margins of oceans, life expanded its reach. Tiny whisperers, once confined to the hidden depths, now touched the edges of continents, sensing the possibilities beyond water. The Earth, once molten, storm-laden, and turbulent, now held within it the first subtle imprints of terrestrial life. Pools shimmered with molecules, protocells multiplied, and microbial mats formed patterns that would echo through eons. Life had learned to touch land, to harness light, and to adapt to cycles of challenge and renewal. The stage was now set for the next grand chapter, where oceans, land, and living beings would continue their eternal dance under the sun's gaze. As the first light of the sun warmed the edges of continents and the shallow pools at ocean margins, Earth entered a period of subtle yet profound transformation. The planet, once young and tumultuous, had begun to stabilize, yet it remained dynamic and ever-changing. Continents slowly shifted atop the molten mantle. Mountains rose where collisions occurred, and basins sank to create deeper seas. Ocean currents carved channels and distributed nutrients, while winds and storms circulated heat, moisture, and chemicals across the globe. In this intricate dance of geological and atmospheric forces, life found new niches, exploring the thresholds of possibility with patience, persistence, and adaptation. In the shallow pools along coastal plains, protocells and microbial mats thrived. These communities had learned to withstand cycles of drying and flooding, temperature fluctuations, and the intermittent energy of sunlight. Some developed rudimentary protective membranes that prevented desiccation, while others evolved methods to harness light more efficiently, catalyzing reactions that stored energy for periods of scarcity. The interplay of chemical diversity, temperature gradients, and mineral surfaces created a vast network of experimental environments, each offering a unique opportunity for life to innovate, survive, and proliferate. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, volcanic activity continued to enrich oceans with minerals and gases. Hydrothermal vents, pockets of intense heat and chemical activity, provided stable refuges where early life could persist and experiment with new metabolic pathways. The release of hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other compounds offered energy for chemosynthetic organisms who thrived in these extreme conditions. Over time, gradients of energy, chemistry, and temperature created selective pressures that favored increasingly robust and complex protocells. Survival demanded not only endurance, but the capacity to adapt, catalyze reactions efficiently, and exploit resources in innovative ways. The atmosphere, now thick with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and trace gases, played a critical role in shaping life's trajectory. Storms, lightning, and wind distributed chemicals across the surface, while rainwater delivered nutrients to shallow pools and basins. Temperature variations between sunlit and shaded regions generated microclimates, enabling diverse strategies for survival. Life responded to these cycles with persistence, adjusting internal chemistry, reinforcing membranes, and developing new methods to store and utilize energy. In this invisible yet relentless interplay, the stage for the next leap in Earth's story was being meticulously prepared. On the continents themselves, newly emerged volcanic islands, ridges, and tidal flats presented novel opportunities. Pools trapped behind rising land, isolated from open seas, created controlled environments where molecules and protocells could persist and interact. Here, primitive metabolic networks became more complex, replication became slightly more accurate, and cooperative interactions among protocells began to appear. Microbial mats extended across shallow surfaces, stabilizing sediments, enriching local chemistry, and creating a scaffold upon which further biological innovation could occur. Life was quietly shaping its environment, even as the environment shaped life. A subtle, self-reinforcing feedback loop guiding evolution toward the next stage. Currents transported nutrients, chemical compounds, and proto-life forms across shallow seas and coastal zones. Tides and storms ensured mixing and redistribution, providing opportunities for interaction, fusion, and diversification. In sheltered pools, protocells that could endure longer periods without water, resist heat, or efficiently store energy survived preferentially. Some developed rudimentary energy storage mechanisms, others refined replication strategies, and still others formed rudimentary cooperative networks, combining capabilities to increase resilience. These interactions, invisible to any observer, were the foundation of ecological systems that would one day dominate Earth's land and oceans. Lightning strikes continued to catalyze chemical reactions, providing bursts of energy that reshaped molecules and created new compounds. Minerals delivered by volcanic eruptions and erosion acted as surfaces for reactions, concentrating molecules and facilitating the formation of more complex structures. Pools of water, some small and ephemeral, others larger and stable, became laboratories of emergence. Temperature gradients, chemical concentrations, and energy input combined to favor protocells capable of persisting, reproducing, and responding to environmental stimuli. Life, once confined to randomness, now began to exploit structure and predictability. Over eons, these processes refined the capacity for survival, adaptation, and innovation. Protocells with membranes resistant to desiccation could persist longer outside of water. Chains of molecules capable of replicating more accurately persisted through cycles of stress and renewal. Early metabolic networks expanded, harnessing energy from chemical reactions, light, and gradients in the environment. Communities of protocells interacted, exchanging molecules, catalyzing reactions cooperatively, and creating micro-ecosystems in pools, tidal flats, and shallow coastal zones. Life was no longer passive. It was learning to organize, respond, and prepare for expansion into new frontiers. The Earth itself seemed to guide these developments. Ocean currents brought stability and connectivity. Tides, storms, and rainfall created cycles of challenge and opportunity. Minerals, light, and heat provided energy and substrates for growth. Life responded, adjusting, persisting, and refining its capabilities. These invisible processes laid the foundation for a future in which life would not only exist, but thrive, dominate, and diversify across oceans, shores, and eventually continents. And so, as the oceans rose, the continents shifted, and the sun illuminated shallow pools, the planet prepared for the next chapter. Life had established a foothold, developed resilience, and learned the first lessons of adaptation. Chemical systems had evolved into biological networks. Microscopic communities had begun shaping their environment, and the stage was set for a dramatic leap. From protocells and microbial mats to ecosystems that could extend beyond water's edge. The Earth, patient and eternal, had nurtured the first whispers of life, and now waited silently, offering energy, chemistry, and stability for the next grand evolutionary adventure to unfold. As the young Earth slowly settled into its rhythm, the stage was set for life to leave its first indelible marks upon the planet. Oceans had risen and stabilized. Continents had emerged and shifted, and shallow pools along the margins of these new lands had become thriving laboratories of microscopic experimentation. Here, protocells, microbial mats, and early bacteria had persisted, diversified, and interacted, laying the foundation for ecosystems yet unseen. The chemistry of life had matured into biology, fragile yet resilient, ready to extend its reach into ever more complex forms. The sun's rays warmed the shallow waters and the edges of tidal flats, driving photochemical reactions that energized protocells. Pools concentrated molecules through cycles of evaporation and replenishment, creating gradients that promoted replication, catalysis, and cooperative interactions. Mineral-rich sediments from volcanic eruptions, erosion, and tides provided scaffolding for chemical networks to organize and stabilize. Life, once an invisible whisper within the oceans, now extended its influence to the margins of continents, exploring the boundaries of water and land. Tides and currents distributed organisms across interconnected pools, while storms and rainfall redistributed nutrients, reshaped sediments, and renewed energy cycles. Lightning continued to spark chemical reactions, catalyzing novel molecular arrangements that furthered the complexity of protocells. Microbial mats on rocks and tidal flats became hotspots of activity, concentrating energy and molecules, stabilizing the environment, and facilitating the emergence of primitive metabolic networks. In these dynamic interactions, selection favored persistence, adaptation, and subtle innovation. On the continents themselves, the earliest soils began forming from weathered rock, volcanic ash, and deposited sediments. Pools trapped behind ridges and in shallow basins provided environments where life could experiment with periods of dryness and fluctuating conditions. Protocells adapted to these challenges, developing rudimentary protective membranes, improved replication fidelity, and cooperative interactions with neighboring cells. These adaptations were invisible to the eye, but monumental in their significance, representing the first steps toward life capable of enduring beyond the oceans. Meanwhile, hydrothermal vents and deep-sea basins continued to supply energy and nutrients, allowing chemosynthetic organisms to persist in darkness. The diversity of energy sources, sunlight, chemical gradients, heat, enabled multiple strategies for survival. Life had learned to exploit every available niche, responding to cycles of challenge and abundance, preparing for the moment when the planet itself would offer unprecedented opportunities for expansion. These tiny organisms, though microscopic, had become architects of their environment, subtly reshaping chemistry, sediment, and microclimate in ways that would echo through eons. Over millennia, stable patterns began to emerge. Shallow coastal pools hosted dense mats of microbial life, contributing to the chemical complexity of surrounding waters. Currents distributed cells and molecules, promoting diversity and facilitating interactions that refined replication and metabolism. Exposure to sunlight drove energy capture, while intermittent drying challenged protocells to endure. Life, once confined to the oceans, now extended into transitional zones between water and land, exploring the delicate interface where adaptation, resilience, and innovation converged. In these transitional zones, the first rudimentary cycles of nutrient recycling appeared. Microbial mats trapped and processed minerals, converting them into forms usable by neighboring cells. Pools served as incubators for chemical innovation, where molecules could interact under varied conditions, producing new structures capable of sustaining replication and rudimentary metabolism. The repeated interplay of challenge and renewal created a subtle but powerful selective pressure, refining life's earliest mechanisms for survival. Storms, tides, and volcanic activity continued to influence the landscape, redistributing minerals, shaping sediments, and altering chemical gradients. Pools flooded and dried, currents carried nutrients and cells, and lightning catalyzed reactions that could not occur otherwise. Life responded with persistence, adaptation, and innovation. Each event, each cycle, reinforced the capacity of organisms to endure, thrive, and prepare for the next phase of evolution. These processes, though invisible to human eyes, set the foundation for the first true biological era, a time when life would expand across oceans, coasts, and eventually into the terrestrial environment. And so, as the sun warmed the young continents and shallow pools glimmered with microscopic activity, Earth stood poised at the threshold of its first great biological era. Life had persisted through chemistry, endured through challenge, and innovated through subtle interactions. The oceans, continents, and atmosphere had formed a complex, interconnected system capable of supporting life at an unprecedented scale. The first whispers of ecosystems, nutrient cycles, and adaptation had emerged. Protocells had multiplied, microbial mats had organized, and the stage was set for life to leave its first visible imprint on the world. In this quiet, patient preparation, the Earth had nurtured the conditions for the next grand chapter, a world in which life would flourish, diversify, and evolve beyond microscopic forms. The first era of life awaited, ready to unfold across oceans, shores, and eventually the land itself. And though invisible to any observer, these tiny pioneers had already begun the journey that would one day shape every living being on the planet. Episode 1. The Dawn Before Time concluded here, having chronicled the birth of Earth, the chemistry of life, the emergence of protocells, the shaping of continents, and the earliest whispers of life on land. The stage was now set, the actors invisible yet persistent, for the next episode in this timeless saga. The first era of life, when Earth would come alive in ways unimaginable and the story of life would truly begin to unfold.